met William Vacchiano when I was in the West Point Band. I had chosen the West Point Band after having been drafted into the Army. And I chose it because it was only 35 miles north of New York City. I thought this was a perfect time, perfect opportunity for me to go in and get first-class instruction in the city. And my primary objective was to study with William Vacchiano. I had trouble getting to him. He wasn't taking any students outside of his Juilliard bunch, and I had already finished my undergraduate work at University of Southern California. But Freddie Mills, who later became a member of the founding member of the Canadian Brass, Fred Mills had been a roommate of one of my West Point colleagues, and Fred was able to smooth that out for me, and he was able to make contact with Vacchiano, and as a result of that, I was able to study with Bill for 2 years and about 6 months or so. In those days, in the 1950s, Bill Vacchiano was the trumpet teacher in the United States. Everyone went to study with him. In those days, the emphasis was on orchestral playing for classical trumpet players. And in those days, they didn't have the kinds of national auditions that they have now for orchestras. Most of the orchestras were really part-time work. They were seasonal, maybe 20, 25, 30 weeks a year. Kansas City, New Orleans, Dallas, Houston, and those. And they would come to New York every spring, and they would have rounds of auditions, usually in hotel rooms in New York City. And because William Vacchiano was sitting in the Juilliard School teaching, his students seemed to get all the jobs during those days, or most of the jobs. And so, rightfully or wrongfully, he became the state of the art. Just as later in the century, the Northwestern School with Vince Chikowitz became important. At that time, Vacchiano was the man to study with, and so we all went there. I had a considerable amount of playing experience, performing experience in Los Angeles. I mean, professional performance experience. I played in orchestras conducted by people like Stravinsky, and I played one recording session which was conducted by Bruno Walter, the Columbia Symphony Orchestra. I was just an extra trumpet player. I mean, I was always the low man on the totem pole. If there were 5 trumpet parts, 5th was mine. If there were 3 trumpet parts, I played 3rd. But I was a kid, but I had some performing experience. So when my first lesson with Vacchiano, he said, I don't know if I can do anything with you because you have no training. In fact, the exact term he used was schooling, without the G. Schooling. You don't have any schooling. And he says, I don't know whether I have the time to take you under my wing and try to do anything with it. He told me, usually when someone gets to be your age, at the time I think I was about 21 or 22, it's too late. It's just too late. And I was really brought down by that, but I spoke with Mel Broyles, with whom I had an acquaintance, and I spoke with Mel, and he said, if he said you had no schooling, I'd take him at his word. He said, this guy is the teacher, and if he sees some holes, he said, he's not kidding. And he said, stick it out. And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, stick it out. He said, 6 months from now, we'll talk. He says, and you'll agree you made the right decision. Because you have to remember, he said, he's the kind of person who will try to discourage you because he wants to see just how dedicated you are. If you really want to play or not, if you really have it. So he says the first few lessons are going to be rough. He said his first few lessons were impossible. So I said, okay. And I stuck it out. And then finally, after about the 4th or 5th time with Vacchiano, he decided that maybe I was serious about studying the trumpet. And so he started opening up and introducing me to all these things that proved that he was exactly right. I had no schooling. I was just a smart aleck young trumpet player who knew all the answers. And found out that I knew very little.